She had $40 million, a mansion with 12 bedrooms, three daughters who hadn't spoken a single word in 18 months. But the moment Victoria Sterling walked into her kitchen that rainy Tuesday evening, she knew, with the certainty of a woman watching her world collapse, that everything was about to change forever. The scene before her was impossible. Her three little girls, Emma, Sophie, and Mia, sat on the kitchen counter, legs swinging, faces bright with something Victoria hadn't seen in over a year: joy. Behind them stood a stranger, a man in navy coveralls, tool bag at his feet, Mia perched on his shoulders with her tiny arms wrapped around his head. He was singing. They were all singing. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." For 3 heartbeats, exactly three, Victoria felt her chest crack open with relief so pure it nearly buckled her knees. They're okay. They're healing. They're laughing. Then the fear crashed through. They're laughing because of him, not me. Him, a stranger. They don't need me anymore. 1,000 dark thoughts converged into one explosive emotion she couldn't contain. What the hell is going on here? Her voice tore through the kitchen like shattered glass. The laughter died instantly. The singing stopped. Mia's hand slipped from the stranger's shoulders, and he caught her gently, whispering something Victoria couldn't hear. But she didn't care what he said. She only saw her daughters clinging to someone who wasn't her. And in that moment, Victoria Sterling made the worst decision of her life, 6 weeks earlier. The conference room on Madison Avenue smelled like recycled air and expensive cologne. Victoria sat at the head of the long glass table, hands folded neatly, the same posture that had intimidated board members and closed billion-dollar deals for 15 years. But today her pulse thudded beneath her skin in a way no hostile takeover ever had. Across from her sat Dr. Morrison, a child psychologist barely past 30, and beside her, a CPS worker whose voice carried the weight of legal authority. "Mrs. Sterling," the CPS worker began, flipping through a thick file, "your daughters haven't spoken in 18 months. They communicate only with each other, only in whispers, and only after midnight when they believe no adult can hear." Victoria's throat tightened. She knew this. She had lived with this silence every single day since the accident. Dr. Morrison leaned forward, her voice gentle but unflinching. "Trauma this severe requires consistent emotional presence, not nannies, not housekeepers, not expensive therapy sessions twice a week. You, Mrs. Sterling, your children need you." "I'm doing everything I can." "Are you?" The CPS worker's voice was flat. "Our records show you've been home an average of 4 hours per day. You've taken 11 international business trips in the past 6 months. Your daughters have had 7 different nannies since their father's death." Victoria wanted to scream. "I work because if I stop, I'll drown. I stay away because every room in that house reminds me of him. I can't look at my daughters without seeing their father's eyes, without hearing his voice, without feeling the weight of what I lost." But she said nothing. She had built her empire on silence and control. She wasn't about to crack now. "If we don't see significant improvement in 90 days, the CPS worker announced, closing the file with a decisive snap, "we will petition for temporary guardianship transfer." Victoria stopped breathing. "To whom?" she whispered. The CPS worker glanced at her notes. "Your mother-in-law, Eleanor Sterling, has already filed a formal request. She believes the children would be better served in her care." The words hit like a physical blow. Eleanor. Of course it was Eleanor. Eleanor Sterling was old money, old power, and old grief twisted into cold fury. She had never approved of Victoria, the self-made CEO who had clawed her way up from nothing, who had stolen her precious son's heart with ambition and sharp edges instead of breeding in grace. And when Michael died, Eleanor found someone to blame. If you hadn't demanded he come home early from that business dinner, if you hadn't called him crying about the girls being sick, if you hadn't made him drive through that storm, 18 months of quiet accusations, 18 months of legal maneuvering, 18 months of documenting every missed school event, every international trip, every hour Victoria spent at the office instead of with her granddaughters. Eleanor had been building her case like a general preparing for war, and now she had 90 days to win it. Victoria drove home through sheets of rain. The windshield wipers beat a rhythm that matched her racing heart. Her phone buzzed. Eleanor's name glowed on the screen. She didn't answer, but the voicemail played automatically through her car's speakers, and Eleanor's voice filled the space like poison. Victoria, I know about the CPS meeting. 90 days. That's how long you have to prove you're not the mother I know you are. And when you fail, and you will fail, those girls will finally have someone who puts them first. A pause. Michael would be so disappointed in you. The line went dead. Victoria gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles went white, tears streaming down her face as the rain hammered against the glass. The Sterling estate at night looked like something from a Gothic novel, beautiful, sprawling, and haunted by silence. Victoria entered through the massive front door. Her heels echoed through marble hallways that used to ring with children's laughter, with Michael's off-key singing, with the chaos of family life. Now there was only silence. She passed the living room where Michael had proposed, dropping to one knee with a ring he couldn't afford and a smile that promised forever. She passed the stairs where the girls used to slide down on their bellies, shrieking with joy while Michael pretended to be a monster chasing them. She passed the kitchen where Michael made pancakes every Sunday morning, flour on his nose, the girls giggling as they helped by making the biggest mess possible. Everything was perfectly preserved. Everything was perfectly dead. Margaret, the gray-haired housekeeper, who had served the family for 15 years, greeted her quietly. The girls are in their room, Miss Victoria. They had a difficult day. Victoria nodded. She should go to them. She should hold them. She should try. But her feet carried her to Michael's study instead, the one room she hadn't entered since the funeral. She stood at the door, hand on the handle, unable to turn it. Behind her upstairs, 3 little girls huddled together on a soft rug, whispering secrets only they could hear. 4 years old, triplets with 3 different temperaments but one shared wound. They were there the night their father died. They heard the tires screech on wet pavement. They saw the headlights of the oncoming truck. They screamed for Daddy until their tiny voices went raw. And then the silence came. It never left. That night, the silence in the Sterling house was so complete, not even the walls remembered what laughter sounded like. But in less than 24 hours, a stranger would walk through the front door, and nothing would ever be the same. The doorbell rang at 9:47 the next morning. Margaret opened the door to find a man standing there, mid-30s, navy coveralls, a worn tool bag slung over his shoulder. He smelled faintly of motor oil and morning air. "Ma'am," he said, voice warm and steady. "Maintenance request, kitchen sink, couple of outlets, squeaky door hinge." His name was Daniel Brooks. Danny to anyone who knew him. Single father, double shifts, working himself to exhaustion to pay for his 9-year-old son's heart medication. What no one knew yet, not Victoria, not Margaret, not even Danny himself, was that this man was about to change everything. Margaret led him to the kitchen. She had been requesting repairs for months, not because the house desperately needed fixing, but because she was desperate for any human presence that might somehow reach the girls. Danny worked quietly, methodically. He didn't force conversation. He didn't make a big show of noticing the 3 small heads peeking from behind the pantry door. He simply talked to the pipes. "All right, little guy," he murmured, tapping a wrench against metal. "Let's see what's making you so grumpy today." The pipes gurgled in response. Ah, Danny nodded seriously, as if the pipes had spoken actual words. Indigestion, too much soap, classic problem. Don't worry, we'll get you sorted out. From behind the pantry door, the faintest sound emerged. A breath. A breath that might have been a giggle. Danny didn't turn around, didn't make a big deal of it. He just kept working, kept talking to the pipes like they were old friends having coffee, and three little girls inched closer. Over the next 6 weeks, Danny became a fixture in the Sterling house. There was always something to fix. A flickering light in the hallway, a door hinge that shrieked every time it opened, a loose railing on the stairs. Margaret made sure of it. Danny never pushed the girls, never asked them questions, never used the cheerful, high-pitched baby talk that other adults tried and failed with. He simply existed beside them, comfortable, reliable, like a lighthouse the shore could depend on. One morning while folding hand towels beside the sink, he demonstrated a simple trick. You know, he said casually, if you fold a towel just right, like this, see? It turns into a boat. He set the finished piece on the floor. The towel-wrapped shape rocked slightly on the tile, looking remarkably like a tiny sailboat. Mia, the youngest, the one who used to be the boldest, inched toward it, then closer. Then her small fingers reached out and touched it. Danny didn't comment. He just folded another towel, turning this one into an even clumsier sailboat. This one's the Titanic, he said seriously. Not great at staying afloat, but very dramatic. The next day, Emma, the eldest, the one who had always been the most protective, said one word. More. Danny pretended to think hard. More what? More boats? More stories? More cookies? I vote cookies, personally. Emma shook her head, but the smallest smile tugged at her lips. 2 days later, Sophie said, again. 2 days after that, Mia whispered monster, referring to the pipe monster Donnie had invented, the one who lived under the sink and was terrified of soap bubbles. Each word was a treasure. Each syllable was a victory against 18 months of darkness. But Danny carried his own wounds. During afternoon breaks, he FaceTimed with his son Lucas, a sharp-witted, funny 9-year-old who was hooked up to a portable nebulizer most days. Lucas had a congenital heart condition that required expensive medication and increasingly frequent hospital visits. Ladies, Lucas announced to the triplets in his best superhero voice, I am Captain Oxygen, protector of weak lungs everywhere. Fear not, I shall defend you from all breathing difficulties. The girls giggled. Mia hid behind Sophie but peeked between her fingers, fascinated by this boy on the screen who made jokes about his own illness. What the girls didn't see was what happened after the call ended. Danny stepped into the laundry room, closed the door quietly behind him, slid down the wall until he was sitting on the cold tile floor. His hands shook as he opened his phone. A notification from the hospital billing department, $52,000. Insurance claim denied. Payment due in 30 days. Lucas needed a new procedure. A specialist in Boston. Equipment that insurance called experimental, even though it could save his life. Danny pressed his palms against his eyes. He didn't cry. He was too exhausted to cry. But his chest ached with a fear so familiar it had become part of him. He thought about Lucas, 9 years old, sharp as a tack, braver than any kid should have to be. Lucas, who joked about being Captain Oxygen because laughing was easier than crying. Lucas, whose heart was failing one beat at a time while his father worked double shifts and still couldn't keep up with the bills. This is why Danny understood the Sterling girls. This is why he never pushed, never demanded, never forced them to heal on someone else's timeline. Because he knew what it was like to love someone so much that losing them would end you. And he knew what it was like to be terrified every single day that today might be the day. A rainy afternoon. Thunder growled outside the tall windows. The sky had turned the color of bruises. The girls were restless, pacing in tight circles, clinging to each other like survivors on a life raft. Rain reminded them of the night Daddy died. Margaret tried warm milk, soft music, gentle words. Nothing worked. Danny knelt by the sink, pretending to adjust something, but his attention was entirely on the three small figures huddled in the corner. He could feel the tension in the room, thick, suffocating, painfully familiar. He made a decision. He started humming, soft, slow. Then the words slipped out, barely louder than the rain against the windows. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." The girls froze. "You make me happy when skies are gray." Mia, brave little Mia, took one step forward, then another. "You'll never know, dear, how much I love you." And then, soft as a whisper, fragile as spun glass, Mia sang the next line. Her voice was broken, uncertain, trembling, but it was there. For the first time in 18 months, a Sterling child spoke. Not to her mother, not to her grandmother, not to any of the expensive therapists or specialists or experts. To a stranger in Navy coveralls who talked to pipes and made towel boats and never once demanded anything from them. Sophie joined, her voice thin and wavering. Then Emma, the protector, added her soft harmony. Three small voices, singing through the storm. Margaret stood in the doorway, hand pressed over her mouth, tears streaming down her weathered face. She pulled out her phone, thumb hovering over Victoria's number. Should I tell her? Or will knowing her daughter's healed without her break her completely? She put the phone away. Some truths were too heavy to deliver over a call. Victoria's flight from London was canceled. Bad weather, grounded planes. She came home early, exhausted from 14-hour negotiations, desperate for the only thing that had sustained her for 18 months. Silence. But silence didn't greet her. Laughter greeted her. Children's laughter. Her children's laughter. The sound hit her like an electric shock. She stood frozen in the hallway, unable to move, unable to breathe. That's impossible. They don't laugh. They haven't laughed since... She followed the sound like a woman walking through a dream. Each step felt heavy, unreal. The laughter grew louder, brighter. She reached the kitchen doorway. She looked inside, and everything she thought she knew about her family shattered into a million pieces. What the hell is going on here? The words exploded out of her before she could stop them. The laughter died. The room went cold. Danny turned, Mia still on his shoulders. His expression was calm, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or disappointment. "Who are you?" Victoria demanded, her voice cracking. "Why are you touching my children?" He set Mia down carefully, gently, with the practiced hands of a father who knew how to handle fragile things. "I'm the maintenance guy. I've been fixing things around the house for 6 weeks. They followed me. They wanted to sing." "They followed you?" Victoria's voice rose. "They don't follow anyone. They don't speak to anyone." Danny met her eyes steadily. "They spoke today." The silence that followed was devastating. Victoria stared at this stranger, this man in work clothes who smelled like metal and soap, and saw what she couldn't deny. Her daughters had chosen him. They were healing without her, and something inside Victoria, something wounded and terrified and completely irrational, snapped. "You're fired. Get out of my house, now." The girls made 3 small sounds, not words, just tiny gasps of protest that died in their throats before they could become anything more. Danny gathered his tools slowly. At the kitchen door, he paused and turned back. "They don't need a hero, Mrs. Sterling," he said quietly. "They need their mother. Try actually being here." He left. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and the silence crashed back into the Sterling house like a wave reclaiming the shore. The girls stared at the floor. They didn't speak. They didn't cry. They simply retreated back into themselves. Three small shells closing up against the world. Victoria stood alone in the middle of the kitchen, surrounded by every luxury money could buy, and felt the full weight of what she had just destroyed. That night, Victoria made a choice that would haunt her for weeks. But she didn't know yet that her mother-in-law had been watching. Eleanor Sterling had cameras installed throughout the estate, staff members quietly reporting back to her, eyes and ears everywhere. And she had just found her weapon. 3 days later, Victoria received a legal summons. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive, embossed with the letterhead of Eleanor Sterling's law firm. Inside, the language was cold and precise. Emergency petition for temporary custody, evidence of child endangerment, hearing scheduled for day 85. Victoria's hands shook as she read the attached exhibits. Photographs of Danny holding the girls, video footage of them singing together in the kitchen, testimony from concerned household staff about an unvetted stranger spending hours alone with the children. Eleanor had been building this case for 18 months. She was waiting for Victoria to make one mistake, and Victoria had handed it to her gift-wrapped. "She's claiming you endangered them," Victoria's lawyer explained over the phone, his voice carefully neutral. "That you allowed an unknown man unsupervised access to minors, combined with the CPS file, the documented absences, the history of negligence." "He was fixing the sink," Victoria whispered. "That's not what it looks like in these photos, Mrs. Sterling." The custody hearing was scheduled for day 85, 5 days before the CPS deadline. If Eleanor won, Victoria would lose her daughters permanently. That night, Victoria finally entered Michael's study. The door creaked as it opened, releasing air that had been sealed for 18 months. Dust motes danced in the dim light from the hallway. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. His books on the shelf, his coffee mug by the window, the photograph of their wedding day on his desk. She sat in his chair. The leather still smelled faintly of his cologne. She opened the desk drawer with trembling fingers. Inside, beneath old receipts and business cards, she found something she never knew existed. A letter, addressed to her, in Michael's handwriting. The paper was slightly yellowed. He must have written it years ago, tucked it away, never expecting anyone to find it until he was gone. "My darling Victoria, if you're reading this, something happened, and knowing you, knowing how that beautiful, stubborn brain of yours works, you're probably drowning yourself in work instead of grief. That's okay. That's how you've always survived. But the girls need you, not the CEO, not the billionaire, not the woman who built an empire from nothing. They need the woman who laughed at my terrible jokes, the woman who cried at dog commercials and pretended she didn't, the woman who sang lullabies even though she's completely tone deaf. Don't let grief turn you into a stranger to them. Don't let fear keep you from the people who love you. You are their sunshine, Victoria, even when skies are gray. Forever yours, Michael." Victoria broke. She cried for the first time in 18 months, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body, that tore through the silence of the empty house like a hurricane through glass. She cried for Michael. She cried for her daughters. She cried for the mother she used to be and the ghost she had become. When she finally stopped, her eyes swollen and her chest hollow, she knew what she had to do. The apartment building in Yonkers was modest. Narrow hallways, thin walls, the smell of someone's dinner drifting from behind a door. Victoria stood outside apartment 4B, her heart pounding. She knocked. The door opened. Lucas, 9 years old, nebulizer in hand, eyes sharp with intelligence, looked up at her. "You're the lady who fired my dad." The words hit like stones. "Yes," Victoria said quietly. "I am." Before she could say more, Danny appeared behind his son. He looked tired, older than 6 weeks ago. The lines around his eyes had deepened, and there was a weariness in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. Lucas, go finish your homework. But Dad, now, buddy. Lucas retreated, but Victoria could feel his eyes watching through the crack in his bedroom door. Danny leaned against the door frame, arms crossed. What do you want, Mrs. Sterling? To apologize and to explain. She told him everything. About Michael's death. About the guilt that consumed her every waking moment. The phone call she made that night, begging him to come home early. The storm he drove through because she asked him to. About how she had buried herself in work because stopping meant feeling, and feeling meant drowning. About Eleanor's lawsuit, about the photographs, about the hearing in 6 weeks that could take her daughters forever, about the letter she found in Michael's desk. Danny listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. I'm sorry about your husband, he said finally. I'm sorry about your mother-in-law. But that's not why you're here. Victoria took a shaky breath. I watched the security footage. After you left, I saw everything you did for my daughters. I saw them laugh. I saw them sing. I saw them heal. Her voice cracked. And I realized they weren't choosing you over me. They were finding their way back to me. You built a bridge for them, and I burned it down because I was jealous, because I was scared, because I wasn't ready to face what I had become. Danny studied her face for a long time. Whatever he saw there made something in his expression soften, just slightly. I can't fix your custody case, he said quietly. I can't fix your relationship with your daughters, but I can tell you what I know. What's that? Kids don't need perfect parents. They need present ones. Every single day you show up, even when it's hard, even when they push you away, even when you feel like you're failing, that's what heals them. Not grand gestures, not expensive gifts. Just staying. Victoria nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. Danny hesitated, then added, My son Lucas needs surgery, a specialist in Boston, $52,000. Insurance says the procedure is experimental, so they won't cover it. Victoria reached for her purse. No. Danny's voice was firm. I didn't tell you for money. I told you because you need to understand something. He stepped closer, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. We're all fighting something, Mrs. Sterling, every single one of us. You're not special in your pain. You're just another broken person trying to keep the people you love alive. He paused. Welcome to the club. Victoria left that apartment with something she hadn't felt in 18 months. Hope. But she didn't know that Eleanor was preparing her final move. A courtroom ambush that would force Victoria to face every failure, every absence, every moment she had chosen work over her children. In 6 weeks, she would stand before a judge and fight for the only thing that truly mattered. And she had no idea if she could win. Day 85, the Westchester County Family Courthouse. Victoria sat at the defendant's table, her lawyer shuffling papers beside her. Across the aisle, Eleanor Sterling sat ramrod straight, her silver hair immaculate, her eyes cold as winter stone. The courtroom was small, functional. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead like a constant reminder that this was not a place for drama, only decisions. Eleanor's attorney presented the evidence methodically. The photographs, the video, the testimony of concerned household staff, the documented absences, the CPS file, the pattern of what he called systematic neglect. Your Honor, Eleanor's lawyer concluded, this is a mother who has repeatedly prioritized her career over her children, who has left them in the care of strangers, including, most recently, an unvetted maintenance worker with whom she allowed unsupervised contact. The grandmother, Mrs. Eleanor Sterling, offers stability, consistency, and an environment where these traumatized children can finally begin to heal. Eleanor didn't smile. She didn't have to. Then Victoria took the stand. Her lawyer had prepared a defense, witnesses, character testimonials, evidence of her financial stability, her recent efforts to change, the steps she had taken since that day in the kitchen. But when Victoria opened her mouth, none of that came out. "I've been a terrible mother." The courtroom went silent. Her lawyer's pen stopped moving. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly. "Not because I don't love my daughters," Victoria continued, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I love them more than my own life, but because I was so afraid of feeling the pain of losing my husband that I ran from everything that reminded me of him, including our children." She looked at the judge, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses perched on her nose and eyes that had seen 30 years of family tragedies. 18 months ago, I stopped being present. I buried myself in work because it was easier than grief. I let strangers raise my daughters because looking at them meant seeing their father's eyes, hearing his laugh, remembering everything I lost. Victoria's voice cracked, but she pushed through. And when someone finally reached them, when a kind man with a broken heart of his own made them laugh for the first time since their father died, I fired him because I was jealous, because I was scared, because I wasn't ready to face what I had become. She turned to look at Eleanor. "You want to take my daughters because you blame me for Michael's death. Maybe you're right. Maybe if I hadn't called him that night, begged him to come home early because the girls were sick, he would still be alive. I will carry that guilt until the day I die." Eleanor's composure flickered. Something raw and wounded passed through her eyes. "But taking Emma and Sophie and Mia won't bring Michael back," Victoria said softly. "It will only create more broken people, more silence, more loss." She turned back to the judge. "I'm not asking for sympathy, Your Honor. I haven't earned it. I'm asking for 90 days, not to prove I'm a good mother. I haven't been, but to prove I can become one." The courtroom was completely still. Then the judge spoke. "I'm going to grant a 90-day continuance. Mrs. Sterling, you will have supervised visits initially, mandatory therapy sessions, and monthly progress reviews. At the end of 90 days, we will reconvene to evaluate whether you have demonstrated consistent, meaningful presence in your daughters' lives." She paused, her gaze moving between Victoria and Eleanor. "If you have not shown significant improvement, full custody will transfer to the grandmother. Do you understand?" Victoria nodded, tears streaming freely. "I understand, Your Honor." "Then prove it." Day 86. Victoria canceled everything. The Singapore deal, $2 billion, gone. The board meetings, the international travel, the 14-hour days. Her board of directors threatened to remove her as CEO. She told them to schedule the vote. She didn't care anymore. She sat on the playroom floor in her designer clothes and let her daughters ignore her. They wouldn't look at her, wouldn't acknowledge her presence. 3 small backs turned away, 3 small bodies huddled together like she was a threat they needed protection from. She stayed anyway. Day 93. Victoria was reading a picture book out loud, to no one really, just filling the silence with words, when Emma turned around. One word, barely a whisper. "Stay." Victoria's heart nearly stopped. "I will," she whispered back. "I promise." Day 108. Sophie climbed into Victoria's lap without being asked. No words, just small arms wrapping around her mother's neck. A warm weight settling against her chest. Victoria held her daughter and cried silent tears into her hair. Day 121. Mia, brave little Mia, the one who had been the first to sing, looked up at Victoria with Michael's eyes. "Can Mr. Blue come back?" Victoria didn't hesitate. "I'll ask him." She called Danny that night. Day 130. He came back. Not as an employee, not as a maintenance man with a tool bag and work orders, as family. Lucas bounded through the door first, immediately declaring himself supreme commander of fun and organizing the triplets into an elaborate game involving blanket forts, stuffed animals, and imaginary dragons that needed defeating. Danny stood in the kitchen doorway, watching his son command the chaos with the ease of a natural leader. Victoria stood beside him. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for coming back." Danny shrugged. "I didn't do anything special. I just talked to pipes." "You did more than that." He turned to look at her, really look at her, for the first time since that terrible day in the kitchen. "You look different," he said. "I am different. Tired. Terrified. Every single day." Danny nodded slowly. "That's how you know you're doing it right." Victoria reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded check. She pressed it into his hands. $52,000. Danny's face went still. "I told you I didn't want—" "This isn't charity," Victoria interrupted. "It's not guilt money. It's not me trying to buy forgiveness." She met his eyes. "You taught my daughters that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up. You showed up for them when I couldn't, when I wouldn't. You built them a bridge back to the world." Her voice softened. "Let me do the same for Lucas. Family helping family. That's what this is." Danny stared at the check. His jaw worked. His eyes glistened with something he was too proud to let fall. "I don't know how to thank you for this." "You don't have to. You just have to let your son get the surgery he needs." He folded the check carefully, tucked it into his shirt pocket, and nodded once. Then, for the first time since they'd met, Danny Brooks smiled. The final hearing. Dr. Morrison testified about the remarkable transformation she had witnessed. 3 girls who had been completely nonverbal were now speaking in full sentences, laughing, playing, engaging with the world again. Margaret testified about Victoria's daily presence, how she had given up international travel entirely, how she read bedtime stories every night without exception, how she had learned to sit in the silence and let her daughters come to her instead of pushing. Even the CPS worker acknowledged the change. "In my 15 years with this agency," she said, "I have rarely seen such a dramatic turnaround. Mrs. Sterling has demonstrated exactly the kind of consistent, meaningful presence we were hoping for." The judge reviewed the file, then looked at Victoria. "In my 30 years on this bench, I have seen many parents promise to change. Very few actually do. You, Mrs. Sterling, are one of the few." She closed the folder. Full custody granted to the mother. Case dismissed. Eleanor sat motionless across the aisle. She had lost. Victoria didn't gloat. She didn't celebrate. She simply turned and looked at the woman who had loved Michael first, who had buried her only son, who had channeled her grief into a war she couldn't win. "I'm sorry," Victoria said quietly, "for everything." Eleanor said nothing, but something in her eyes shifted, the hard edge softening, just barely, into something that might have been acceptance. She gathered her things and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. The Sterling estate had transformed. Not the building itself, that was still grand, still sprawling, still worth $40 million. But the silence that had haunted its halls for so long was finally completely gone. Laughter echoed through the hallways now. Muddy footprints tracked across the marble floors. A golden retriever puppy, Sophie's birthday present, chased Mia through the garden while Emma tried to catch butterflies. Victoria knelt in the dirt beside the flower beds, planting sunflowers with her daughters. Her designer jeans were ruined. Her manicure was destroyed. Dirt streaked her cheeks and arms. She had never been happier. "Why sunflowers, Mommy?" Sophie asked, carefully placing a seed in the hole Victoria had dug. Victoria smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her daughter's ear. "Because Daddy loved them. He always said sunflowers are the bravest flowers. No matter how dark the day starts, they always find their way back to the light." Danny appeared from around the corner of the house, Lucas at his side, both of them carrying bags of soil and more seedlings. Lucas's surgery had been a complete success. 3 months post-operation, his heart was stronger than it had ever been. He had stopped calling himself Captain Oxygen, not because he'd outgrown it, but because he didn't need the armor of humor anymore. "More sunflowers?" Danny asked, setting down his load. "We're building a whole field," Mia announced proudly, "so Daddy can see them from heaven." Danny knelt beside Victoria, their shoulders brushing as they worked. "Just like us," he said softly, just turning toward whoever stays. A breeze moved through the garden, rustling the tall blooms that had been planted months ago, the first ones now reaching toward the sky. And then a single butterfly drifted down from somewhere above. Yellow wings, gentle flutter. It circled once, twice, then landed on the tallest sunflower and stayed there, perfectly still, as if it had come home. "Look," Emma whispered, pointing. "Daddy's watching." Victoria pulled her daughters close, breathing in the smell of dirt and flowers in childhood. Danny's hand found her shoulder, warm, steady, present. Lucas leaned against his father, watching the butterfly with quiet wonder. And standing at the end of the driveway, just outside the iron gates, a silver car idled. Eleanor Sterling had come to visit her granddaughters, not to fight, not to judge, but simply to see them. Victoria noticed the car. She raised a hand in a small wave. After a long moment, Eleanor waved back. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever completely, but it was a beginning. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, exhausted from a day of digging and planting and laughing, Victoria stood alone in Michael's study. She held his letter in her hands, the pages soft now from being read over and over. "You are their sunshine, Victoria, even when skies are gray." She pressed the letter to her heart, then carefully placed it back in the drawer. "I stayed, Michael," she whispered to the empty room. "I finally stayed." Outside, through the window, the garden glowed in the last golden light of day. The sunflowers swayed in the evening breeze. The puppy barked at something only he could see. And somewhere in the house, her daughters were sleeping peacefully, dreaming perhaps of butterflies and sunshine and a father who loved them. Victoria smiled, because she understood now what it had taken her 18 months of silence and pain and loss to learn. Her greatest wealth had never been the mansion or the company or the $40 million in her accounts. It was the small hands reaching for hers in the morning. It was the laughter that filled the hallways after so much silence. It was the healing that came from simply, stubbornly, impossibly showing up every single day, no matter how hard it was, no matter how scared she felt, just staying. And in the end, that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. Sometimes the quietest houses hide the loudest heartbreaks. But sometimes, if you're brave enough to stay, they also hold the greatest healing. And sometimes, just sometimes, the stranger who comes to fix your sink ends up fixing your whole life.